The Wild West, a time when men were made of iron, horses ran wild, and justice was handed out with a six-shooter. Among the rogues and renegades who roamed the untamed frontier, one name strikes fear and fascination alike: Tom Horn. Now, if you've never heard of Tom Horn, you're in for a wild ride, my friend. Picture this: a man with the sharpshooting skills of Annie Oakley, the mystery of a Western Sherlock Holmes, and the moral compass of, well, a tumbleweed blowing through a ghost town. Horn was a man of many hats: cowboy, scout, detective, assassin. And depending on who you ask, some of those hats were stained in blood. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's saddle up and take a ride through the tumultuous, larger-than-life story of Tom Horn, the Wild West's most infamous hired gun. A tough start in the wild frontier. Born in 1860 in rural Missouri, Tom Horn grew up in a world where you had two choices: get tough or get gone. And trust me, Tom got tough. By the age of 16, he had already decided that life on a farm wasn't going to cut it for him. He packed his bags and headed west into the unforgiving expanse of the American frontier. Horn wasn't just some wandering drifter, though. He quickly found work as a scout for the U.S. Army during the Apache Wars. Yeah, you heard that right. Tom Horn spent his early days tracking down Apache warriors like Geronimo, and apparently he was pretty good at it. He had a knack for reading the land, following tracks that would have stumped a bloodhound, and staying cool under pressure when the bullets started flying. In the world of frontier warfare, this made him valuable. He wasn't just a trigger-happy gunslinger. He was calculating, strategic, and above all, ruthless when necessary. The rise of a hired gun. After the Apache Wars, Horn drifted into the next logical career step: bounty hunting. Because, what else are you going to do after spending years chasing down Apache warriors? Now, Tom Horn wasn't the type to chase small-time bandits. Oh no, he went after the big fish, the kind of outlaws who would shoot you as soon as look at you. His reputation as a man who could track anything, anywhere, was growing faster than a prairie fire. But it wasn't just bounty hunting that Horn was interested in. Around 1890, he started working for the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Yep, the same Pinkertons known for smashing strikes and hunting down notorious criminals. With the Pinkertons, Horn developed his skills in surveillance, intelligence gathering, and covert operations. In other words, Horn learned how to be sneaky, real sneaky. If you needed someone found, Horn could find them. If you needed someone, let's say, taken care of, Horn could handle that too, and handle it, he did. Cattle wars and kill contracts. Now here's where Tom Horn's story starts to get murky. And by murky, I mean shady enough to wear a black hat in a noir film. By the mid-1890s, Horn was living in Wyoming, smack dab in the middle of the cattle wars. For those who don't know, the cattle wars weren't just business rivalries. They were open season on anyone who got in the way of big cattle companies. Small ranchers, homesteaders, rustlers, anyone who interfered with the interests of the big cattle barons could find themselves on the wrong end of a rifle. Enter Tom Horn, hired gun. Horn's services were in high demand by the cattlemen, who saw him as a one-man army capable of taking care of their problems. And by problems, I mean anyone they wanted dead. Horn was allegedly involved in a string of mysterious killings during this time, with small-time ranchers turning up dead under suspicious circumstances. Of course, nothing was ever proven, yet. But Horn had a code. He wasn't just some back-alley killer. If you crossed the line, he'd put a bullet in you, sure. But he liked to keep it professional, almost businesslike. After all, he was just a hired hand doing a job, right? The mystery man of the West. Now, if there's one thing you need to know about Tom Horn, it's that he wasn't just another shoot first, ask questions later kind of guy. Oh no, Horn was more like the quiet, brooding gunslinger you'd see standing in the shadows of a saloon, calculating every move. He wasn't one to brag about his skills, but his reputation as a man who could get the job done, whatever that job was, spread faster than rumors in a frontier town. One of the reasons Horn was so valuable wasn't just his ability to take out targets, it was his secrecy. You see, Horn knew how to keep his mouth shut. In a world where everyone had an angle, he was like a closed book with pages written in invisible ink. Most folks didn't even know when Horn had struck until it was too late. His victims, whether they were rustlers, small ranchers, or those who crossed the wrong people, seemed to disappear without a trace, leaving nothing behind but whispers and rumors. This aura of mystery gave Horn a near-mythical status among the cattlemen who hired him. To them, he was an invisible hand of justice, a silent enforcer who dealt with problems before they even fully realized they had one. But for his enemies, well, let's just say, waking up to the possibility that Horn had you in his sights was enough to send even the toughest of men packing. Horn didn't operate like a gunslinger out of a dime novel. There were no dramatic showdowns at high noon or fancy quick draws. He was methodical, a true professional of his craft. He would stalk his prey, biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when that moment came, it was as precise as a surgeon's scalpel, quick, clean, and devastating. But as with any shadowy figure, living in the gray areas of the law could only last so long. Tom Horn's mystery was about to unravel in a way even he couldn't predict. The downfall begins, the killing of Willie Nickell. Now here's the part of Tom Horn's story that put him squarely on the wrong side of history. In July 1901, a 14-year-old boy named Willie Nickell was found dead on his family's ranch, shot in cold blood. Tragic, right? But who could have done such a thing? Well, the locals had a suspect in mind almost immediately: Tom Horn. Why? Because the Nickell family had been involved in disputes with local cattle barons, and Horn had been seen in the area shortly before the boy's murder. Things weren't looking good for our man, but it gets worse. When a deputy marshal, Joe Liefers, invited Horn for a friendly chat, something strange happened. Horn, in what he thought was a casual conversation, made a confession, or at least something that sounded a lot like a confession. He allegedly admitted to killing Willie Nickell, though whether he actually confessed or was tricked into making vague statements is still up for debate. Here's where it gets murky again. Did Tom Horn really confess, or was he caught in a trap? The confession was enough for the authorities, though, and Horn was arrested for the murder of Willie Nickell. The trial of the century. Tom Horn's trial in 1902 was nothing short of a media sensation. People flocked from all over to watch the downfall of the legendary gunslinger. But the trial was, let's just say, not exactly a fair fight. Horn's defense argued that his confession had been coerced and that there was no physical evidence tying him to the murder. But the prosecution had something better than evidence. They had the name Tom Horn. The jury didn't just convict a man, they convicted a legend, a notorious figure whose name was synonymous with violence and lawlessness. In October of 1902, Tom Horn was found guilty and sentenced to death. The verdict sent shockwaves through the West. Here was a man who had spent his life living by the gun, now being condemned by the very system he had worked for. The execution and the legend. On November 20th, 1903, Tom Horn was hanged for the murder of Willie Nickell. He maintained his innocence until the very end, and to this day, there's debate over whether he was truly guilty. Some say he was framed, a scapegoat for the cattle barons who wanted their dirty work swept under the rug. Others argue that Horn was simply reaping what he had sown. Either way, Tom Horn went to his death with the same stoic resolve that had defined his life. It's said that his last words were, "I did it, but I didn't mean to." Now, what exactly that means is anyone's guess, much like Tom Horn himself His final statement was shrouded in ambiguity. Tom Horn's legacy, hero or villain? So, who was Tom Horn? Was he a hero who fought for justice on the frontier? Or was he a villain, a cold-blooded killer who sold his skills to the highest bidder? The truth, like many things in the Wild West, lies somewhere in between. Horn was a product of his time, a time when life was cheap, and survival often meant making choices that weren't exactly black and white. He lived by the gun and died by it, leaving behind a legacy that's as complicated as the man himself. Today, Tom Horn remains one of the most controversial figures in Wild West history. Whether you see him as a tragic figure or a ruthless outlaw, one thing is certain: Tom Horn embodied the brutal, lawless spirit of the American frontier. And that, my friends, is how legends are made.